Picture this. You're 19 years old. You're crouched in a frozen foxhole somewhere in Belgium. Your fingers are so numb you can't even feel the rifle in your hands. And the only thing standing between you and complete starvation is a small brown box. A box that smells like metal and desperation. Would you eat it? Could you survive on it? Today, I'm taking you inside the real meals that kept American soldiers alive during World War II. And I promise you, it's nothing like what you've seen in the movies. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm someone who's obsessed with the untold stories of history. Not the battles you learned about in school, not the generals or the medals, but the real human experiences. The cold nights, the hunger, the letters home that soldiers wrote by candlelight, wondering if they'd ever taste their mother's cooking again. Today, we're diving deep into something most history channels won't touch: food. Specifically, what American soldiers really ate during World War II. And before you click away thinking this is boring, let me tell you something. Food wasn't just about survival. It was about hope. It was about home. It was about the difference between a soldier who could fight and a soldier who would collapse in the snow. I've spent weeks researching this. I've read soldiers' diaries. I've looked at declassified military documents. I've even tried to recreate some of these meals myself. And what I discovered broke my heart and filled me with so much respect for these men. So stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at a simple meal the same way again. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button right now. Let's honor these soldiers together. Let me take you back for a second. Before we talk about what soldiers ate in combat, you need to understand what they left behind. It's 1941. America has just entered the war. Most of these soldiers are boys, really. 18, 19, 20 years old. They grew up during the Great Depression. They know what hunger feels like. Their families survived on bread and beans, on rationed sugar, on gardens that barely produced enough to feed everyone. But even in those hard times, there was something special about a home-cooked meal. Can you imagine the smell of your mother's kitchen on a Sunday morning? Bacon sizzling in an iron skillet, eggs cracking into hot butter, fresh bread still warm with jam your grandmother made last summer, coffee percolating on the stove. That smell meant safety. It meant love. It meant family. Now imagine leaving all of that behind. You're on a train heading to boot camp. You don't know if you'll ever smell that kitchen again. You don't know if you'll ever sit at that table with your father, your mother, your little sister. And the military promises to take care of you. They promise you'll be fed. They promise you'll be strong. But what they don't tell you is that the food you're about to eat will become one of the biggest challenges of your entire service. One soldier wrote in his diary, "I thought I knew what hunger was growing up poor. I was wrong. This is a different kind of hungry. This is the kind that makes you dream about food more than you dream about home." Think about that for a second. More than home. Food becomes an obsession when you don't have enough of it, when it's cold, when it tastes like cardboard, when it's the only thing between you and complete physical collapse. So before we go any further, I want you to do something. Close your eyes for just a moment. Think about the last meal you really enjoyed. Maybe it was breakfast this morning. Maybe it was dinner last night. Now imagine never tasting anything like that again for years. Imagine every meal being a gamble. Imagine eating things that make you gag just to stay alive. That's what we're about to explore. And it's going to change how you see World War II forever. The first meal a soldier ate in the military was usually in boot camp. And for most of them, it was actually pretty good. I know that sounds surprising, but hear me out. The U.S. military understood something important. You can't train a soldier on an empty stomach. You can't build muscle, endurance, and mental toughness if you're starving. So during basic training, meals were substantial. Breakfast might include scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, oatmeal, milk, and coffee. Lunch could be roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, bread, and butter. Dinner was similar. Hearty portions, real meat, vegetables, dessert. The goal was to put weight on these young men, to transform skinny farm boys and city kids into soldiers who could march 20 miles with a full pack. One recruit from Iowa wrote home, "Ma, you wouldn't believe the food here. I've gained 15 pounds already. They feed us 3 hot meals a day. I've never eaten this good in my life." Can you imagine that? Coming from poverty and suddenly having more food than you've ever seen? It must have felt like a dream. But here's the thing nobody told them. This was temporary. This was the calm before the storm. Because once training ended, once they shipped overseas, everything changed. The hot meals stopped. The fresh food disappeared. And the reality of war came crashing down. I want you to think about your last really good meal. Maybe it was at a restaurant. Maybe it was homemade. You probably didn't think twice about it, right? You ate until you were full. Maybe you even left food on your plate. Now imagine that being the last good food you eat for the next 2 years. The last time you taste real butter. The last time you bite into fresh bread. The last time you feel truly satisfied. That's what these soldiers experienced. And they didn't even know it was coming. One soldier later recalled, "If I'd known that Thanksgiving dinner in 1942 would be the last decent meal I would have until 1945, I would have eaten until I burst. I would have memorized every flavor. Instead, I just ate it like it was normal. Like there would be another one next week." But there wouldn't be. Because war doesn't care about your comfort. War doesn't care if you're hungry. War only cares if you can still pull a trigger. And the military had to figure out how to keep millions of soldiers fed across thousands of miles of ocean, in jungles, in deserts, in frozen forests. They had to invent something new, something portable, something that could survive heat, cold, moisture, and months of storage. They had to invent combat rations. And that's where our story really begins. The first meal a soldier ate in the military was usually in boot camp. And for most of them, it was actually pretty good. I know that sounds surprising, but hear me out. The US military understood something important. You can't train a soldier on an empty stomach. You can't build muscle, endurance, and mental toughness if you're starving. So during basic training, meals were substantial. Breakfast might include scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, oatmeal, milk, and coffee. Lunch could be roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, bread, and butter. Dinner was similar. Hearty portions, real meat, vegetables, dessert. The goal was to put weight on these young men, to transform skinny farm boys and city kids into soldiers who could march 20 miles with a full pack. One recruit from Iowa wrote home, "Ma, you wouldn't believe the food here. I've gained 15 pounds already. They feed us 3 hot meals a day. I've never eaten this good in my life." Can you imagine that? Coming from poverty and suddenly having more food than you've ever seen? It must have felt like a dream. But here's the thing nobody told them. This was temporary. This was the calm before the storm. Because once training ended, once they shipped overseas, everything changed. The hot meals stopped, the fresh food disappeared, and the reality of war came crashing down. I want you to think about your last really good meal. Maybe it was at a restaurant, maybe it was homemade. You probably didn't think twice about it, right? You ate until you were full, maybe you even left food on your plate. Now imagine that meal being the last good food you eat for the next 2 years. The last time you taste real butter. The last time you bite into fresh bread. The last time you feel truly satisfied. That's what these soldiers experienced. And they didn't even know it was coming. One soldier later recalled, If I'd known that Thanksgiving dinner in 1942 would be the last decent meal I'd have until 1945, I would have eaten until I burst. I would have memorized every flavor. Instead, I just ate it like it was normal, like there would be another one next week. But there wouldn't be. Because war doesn't care about your comfort. War doesn't care if you're hungry. War only cares if you can still pull a trigger. And the military had to figure out how to keep millions of soldiers fed across thousands of miles of ocean. In jungles, in deserts, in frozen forests. They had to invent something new, something portable, something that could survive heat, cold, moisture, and months of storage. They had to invent combat rations. And that's where our story really begins. Now, let me tell you about the K ration. If C rations were bad, K rations were worse. Much worse. The K ration was designed for paratroopers, commandos, and other troops who needed something even more portable than C rations. Something lighter. Something you could carry in your pockets. The problem? To make it lighter, they had to make it smaller. Much smaller. A K ration contained only about 2,800 calories, and it came in 3 boxes: breakfast, dinner, and supper. Each box was a small cardboard package wrapped in waxed paper. Inside, you'd find 1 can of meat or cheese, crackers or biscuits, a fruit bar or chocolate bar, instant coffee, sugar tablets, cigarettes, chewing gum, toilet paper. That's it. That's what you survived on for an entire day. Let me put this in perspective for you. Have you ever tried to do hard physical labor on less than 3,000 calories? Have you ever tried to function on minimal food while your adrenaline is pumping, your heart is racing, and your body is in constant fight or flight mode? It's not sustainable. Your body starts eating itself. Your muscles break down, your brain gets foggy, you can't think straight. You can't make quick decisions. And in combat, that can get you killed. Soldiers who lived on K rations for extended periods described them as feeling like zombies. Moving through the motions, but not really present. One paratrooper from the 101st Airborne wrote, "After 2 weeks on K-Rats, I couldn't remember my own address. I knew my name, I knew my mission, but everything else was fog. All I could think about was food. Real food. My brain just shut down everything else." Think about that. Your brain literally stops working properly. Memory fades, concentration disappears, all because you're not getting enough food. And the quality of the food in K rations was even worse than C rations. The meat was usually potted meat, a mystery paste that could have been anything. Sometimes it was labeled ham and eggs. Sometimes pork luncheon meat. Sometimes cheese. But it all tasted the same. Salty, greasy, and wrong. The crackers were so hard they could break your teeth. Soldiers called them dog biscuits. You had to soak them in coffee or water just to eat them without injury. And the fruit bars? They were compressed sugar and dried fruit pressed into a brick. One soldier described them as trying to eat a hockey puck made of apricots. But here's where it gets really interesting. Soldiers got creative with their K rations. They had to, or they'd go insane. Some guys would mix the crackers with the potted meat and fry it over a fire, creating a crude burger. Others would dissolve the sugar tablets in their canteens to make sweet water. Some would trade their cigarettes to other soldiers in exchange for extra food. The cigarettes were actually valuable. Not everyone smoked, but everyone needed calories. So cigarettes became currency. You could trade a pack of smokes for an extra can of fruit, or chocolate, or cheese. And if you were smart, you hoarded the good stuff. The chocolate bars were the most valuable. They were called D rations, special high-calorie chocolate bars designed to keep you going in emergencies. But they tasted terrible. They were deliberately made to taste bad, so soldiers wouldn't eat them unless they absolutely had to. The military didn't want guys treating them like candy bars. One soldier described D-ration chocolate. Imagine taking cocoa powder, mixing it with sawdust and wax, then letting it sit in the sun until it's hard as a rock. That's what it tasted like. But when you're starving, it's the best thing you've ever eaten. And that's the heartbreaking truth. When you're hungry enough, anything tastes good. When your body is screaming for calories, your taste buds shut up. You stop caring about flavor. You stop caring about texture. You just eat. Let me share something with you that really got to me. I found a letter from a soldier to his wife. He wrote, "Darling, I dreamed about your pot roast last night. I could smell it. I could taste it. When I woke up, I cried because it wasn't real. I'm surrounded by food, by rations, by all these cans and boxes. But I'm still starving. Not my stomach, but my soul. I'm starving for something that tastes like love." Does that make sense? Yes, it makes perfect sense. Because food is more than nutrition. It's culture. It's memory. It's connection. And when you take that away, when you reduce food to fuel, you take away part of someone's humanity. These soldiers weren't just fighting the enemy. They were fighting to hold on to who they were, to remember what it felt like to be human, to believe they'd someday sit at a table again with people they loved and eat something that made them feel whole. K rations couldn't give them that. C rations couldn't give them that. But they gave them life. And sometimes that had to be enough. Okay, so we've talked about the terrible. Now let me tell you about something slightly better. The 10-in-1 ration. This was designed to feed 10 men for one day. Or one man for 10 days, though nobody wanted to eat the same thing for 10 days straight. The 10-in-1 came in a wooden crate. And when you opened it, it felt like Christmas. I'm serious. Compared to C rations and K rations, the 10-in-1 was luxury. Inside, you'd find canned meat, ham, chicken, beef, canned vegetables, corn, peas, beans, canned fruit, peaches, pears, fruit cocktail, bread or crackers, butter or margarine, jam or jelly. Now let me take you to the Pacific, because everything I've told you so far, it was even worse in the jungle. The European theater was brutal, cold, muddy, exhausting. But the Pacific theater was a special kind of hell. Heat, humidity, disease, and food that rotted before you could eat it. See those tin cans I told you about? They were designed for temperate climates, not for 100-degree heat with 90% humidity. In the Pacific, cans would rust. They'd bulge. They'd explode. The meat inside would spoil. And if you ate it anyway, you'd get violently sick. Dysentery, food poisoning, stomach parasites. Soldiers were already dealing with malaria, dengue fever, and jungle rot. Adding food poisoning to that list was a death sentence. One Marine described it. We'd get our rations and you could tell immediately which cans were bad. They'd be swollen like balloons. But sometimes you were so hungry, you'd eat it anyway. You'd risk it. And then you'd spend the next 3 days wishing you just stayed hungry. Can you imagine that choice? Eat potentially spoiled food and get sick, or don't eat and collapse from exhaustion. There's no good option. You're damned either way. And the military knew this was happening. They tried to address it. They developed the 5-in-1 ration specifically for the Pacific. It was similar to the 10-in-1, but designed for better preservation in tropical climates. But it still wasn't enough. The real problem wasn't the rations. It was the supply chain. Getting food to soldiers in the Pacific was nearly impossible. These men were fighting on tiny islands thousands of miles from the nearest supply base. Ships had to navigate through submarine-infested waters. Planes had to dodge enemy fighters. And even when supplies arrived, they'd sit on the beach, in the sun, baking for days before anyone could distribute them. By the time a soldier got his ration, it might have been exposed to heat for weeks. The meat was often inedible. The crackers were stale and crawling with bugs. The chocolate had melted and re-hardened into weird shapes. And the fruit? Fermented. One soldier joked, "The only good thing about the Pacific was our fruit cocktail turned into alcohol. We were eating boozy peaches. Made the war a little more tolerable." But behind that joke was real suffering. These men were starving. They were losing weight so fast their uniforms wouldn't stay on. Their bodies were covered in sores that wouldn't heal because they didn't have proper nutrition. Their teeth were falling out from scurvy. Their bones were brittle from calcium deficiency. And they kept fighting. They kept marching. They kept pushing forward. Because what choice did they have? For love, and how food became the symbol of everything they'd lost. I want you to think about your own family meals. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Sunday dinners, birthdays. These aren't just about eating. They're about being together. They're about tradition. They're about love made tangible. Now imagine being cut off from that for years. Imagine not knowing if you'll ever experience it again. That's what these soldiers lived with every single day. And it's why, when they came home, many of them couldn't stop eating. They'd sit at the table and eat until they were sick. Not because they were still physically hungry, but because they were trying to fill a hole that went deeper than their stomachs. They were trying to heal something that food alone couldn't fix. Now, I need to talk about something harder: the medical consequences of malnutrition. Because this wasn't just about being uncomfortable. This was about bodies breaking down. The human body needs certain nutrients to function. Proteins to build muscle. Fats for brain function. Vitamins to prevent disease. Minerals for bones and blood. And when you don't get those things, your body starts to fail. Let me describe what happened to soldiers who lived on inadequate rations for extended periods. First, the weight loss. I mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating. Soldiers lost massive amounts of weight. Men who entered the service at 180 pounds came home at 130. That's not healthy weight loss. That's the body consuming itself. Muscle breaks down. Fat reserves disappear. Eventually, the body starts breaking down organs. Your heart gets smaller. Your liver struggles. Your kidneys fail. Second, vitamin deficiencies. Without fresh fruits and vegetables, soldiers develop scurvy. Their gums bled. Their teeth fell out. Old wounds reopened. New wounds wouldn't heal. They got night blindness from lack of vitamin A, beriberi from lack of thiamine, pellagra from lack of niacin. These weren't minor inconveniences. These were life-threatening conditions. One soldier described his scurvy. "My mouth tasted like metal all the time. My gums were so swollen I couldn't close my teeth. When I brushed them, they bled so much I thought I'd drown. And the pain. God, the pain. Every tooth felt like it was being pulled out slowly. But there was nothing they could do. No fresh food meant no cure." No fresh food meant no cure. Think about that. Modern medicine couldn't help. Antibiotics couldn't help. The only cure was nutrition, and they couldn't get it. Third, mental effects. Malnutrition affects your brain. Your cognitive function declines. Your memory gets spotty. Your decision-making ability deteriorates. Depression sets in. Anxiety increases. Some soldiers developed something called starvation neurosis. They became obsessed with food. They hoarded it. They talked about it constantly. They dreamed about it every night. Their entire mental landscape became dominated by thoughts of eating. One psychiatrist who treated soldiers after the war wrote, "The psychological damage from prolonged hunger is profound. These men came home physically intact but mentally shattered. They couldn't trust that food would be available. They panicked if meals were delayed. Some ate compulsively for years. Others developed eating disorders. The trauma of starvation doesn't end when the food returns. The trauma of starvation doesn't end when the food returns." That's a critical point, because many of these soldiers carried this damage for life. They never felt secure about food again. They never felt full. They never stopped being afraid of hunger. And their families didn't understand. How could they? Americans at home had rationing, yes, but they never experienced true starvation. They never felt their bodies failing. So when soldiers came home and exhibited strange behaviors around food, their families thought they were being dramatic, or greedy, or couldn't adjust to civilian life. But the truth was simpler and sadder. They were traumatized, and nobody knew how to help them. Let me share something specific. There was a condition called trench foot in World War I, but in World War II, malnutrition made it worse. When your body doesn't have enough nutrients, your circulation suffers. Your extremities don't get enough blood. In cold weather, this leads to frostbite faster. In wet conditions, your feet rot faster. Soldiers in Europe dealt with this constantly. Their boots would be wet for days, their feet would turn white, then purple, then black. And because they were malnourished, their bodies couldn't fight the infection. Many men lost toes. Some lost entire feet. All because they couldn't get adequate nutrition to keep their circulation strong enough to fight the damage. One soldier wrote, "I lost 3 toes to trench foot. The doctor said if I had been eating better, maybe my body could have handled it. But I wasn't. None of us were. So we paid the price. I'll walk with a limp for the rest of my life because I couldn't get a decent meal. I'll walk with a limp for the rest of my life because I couldn't get a decent meal." That's the physical cost. That's what malnutrition actually means. It's not just feeling hungry. It's permanent damage. It's disabilities. It's suffering that lasts decades. And here's the thing that makes me angriest. Much of this was preventable. The military knew better nutrition was needed. Scientists told them. Doctors warned them. But logistics, cost, and priorities meant that feeding soldiers well wasn't at the top of the list. Ammunition was more important. Fuel was more important. Vehicles were more important. And men suffered because of those choices. I'm not saying those other things weren't important. War is complicated. Supply chains are limited. Decisions have to be made. But I am saying that we need to acknowledge the cost. We need to recognize that soldiers paid with their bodies for those decisions. And we need to honor that sacrifice by telling the truth about it. Okay, I need to shift gears here, because it wasn't all suffering. There were moments of joy. Moments when food brought happiness instead of just survival. Let me tell you about care packages. Families at home could send packages to soldiers overseas, and these packages were treasured like gold. A package from home meant someone loved you. Someone was thinking about you. Someone wanted you to have something special. The most common items in care packages were cookies, usually arrived as crumbs but still delicious, candy, chocolate, gum, jerky, canned goods from home, seasonings and spices. And every soldier had stories about care packages. One soldier wrote, "My girlfriend sent me a 10 of her homemade cookies. They were completely destroyed in shipping, just a pile of crumbs. But I ate every single one. And I cried while I ate them because I could taste love in those crumbs. She made these with her own hands. She thought about me while she baked them. That meant everything. I could taste love in those crumbs." That's what care packages represented. Not just food, but connection. Proof that they hadn't been forgotten. And soldiers shared their care packages. This is important. In a world where food was scarce, sharing was an act of profound generosity. If you got a package, you opened it with your squad. Everyone got a taste. Everyone got a moment of happiness. One soldier described it. "When someone got a package, we'd all gather around like kids on Christmas morning. We'd take turns trying everything. One cookie each, one piece of candy, one stick of gum. Nobody hoarded. Nobody kept it all. Because we knew next time it might be our package, and we'd want them to share with us." That's brotherhood. That's humanity at its best. In the middle of the worst possible circumstances, these men took care of each other. They shared what little they had. They made sure everyone got a moment of joy. Let me tell you about holiday meals. The military tried to do something special. For Thanksgiving and Christmas, when possible, they'd bring in fresh turkeys, real vegetables, cranberry sauce, stuffing, pies. And for one day, soldiers got to feel normal. One soldier described Christmas 1944. "We were in France. It was cold and we'd been fighting for months. But on Christmas Day, they brought us turkey, real turkey, with mashed potatoes and gravy, and for 2 hours we forgot about the war. We sat together, ate together, laughed together. Some guys cried. I'm not ashamed to say I was one of them. It felt like being home." It felt like being home. That's what food could do. It could transport you. It could give you a break from the horror. It could remind you that beauty and goodness still existed. But here's the bittersweet part. Not everyone got these special meals. If you were on the front lines during the holidays, you got nothing special. The war didn't stop for Christmas. Bullets didn't take a holiday. So some men ate cold sea rations on Christmas Day while others ate turkey. And that inequality hurt. One soldier wrote bitterly, "They told us there'd be turkey for Christmas, but we were in combat. No turkey made it to us. We ate the same cold slop we always ate. Meanwhile, guys 20 miles back were having a feast. Merry Christmas to us." That's the reality of war. It's not fair. It's not equal. And sometimes, the soldiers doing the hardest fighting got the least reward. But let me tell you about something beautiful. Soldiers created their own celebrations. When they captured a town, they'd sometimes find local food. In France, they found wine and cheese. In Italy, they found pasta and olive oil. In Germany, they found beer and sausages. And they throw impromptu parties. They'd cook together, share stories, sing songs. For a few hours, they'd forget they were soldiers and just be young men enjoying life. One soldier described finding a cellar full of wine. "We thought we'd hit the jackpot, bottles and bottles of French wine. We opened them all and had a party right there in the rubble. We toasted our fallen friends, we toasted our families, we toasted being alive. And we got drunk and stupid and happy." The next morning, we went back to war. But that night, we were free. That night, we were free. Food gave them that. Celebration gave them that. Joy, even in the middle of hell, was possible. And they took it whenever they could, because they knew tomorrow might be their last day. Tomorrow, they might die. So today, they'd feast. Today, they'd laugh. Today, they'd live. Now let me tell you about coming home, because that's where the story should end happily, right? The war's over, the soldiers are home, they can finally eat real food again. Everything should be fine. But it wasn't. Not for many of them. The first meal home was overwhelming. Soldiers would sit at their family's table and be confronted with abundance: meat, vegetables, bread, butter, dessert, everything they dreamed about for years. And many of them couldn't eat it. Their stomachs had shrunk, their digestive systems had adapted to minimal food, and suddenly being presented with a feast made them sick. One veteran described his first dinner home: "My mother made everything I'd asked for: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh rolls, apple pie. I looked at that table and started crying. She thought I was happy. I was, but I was also terrified. I didn't know if I could eat it. I didn't know if my body would accept it. I took one bite of pot roast and ran to the bathroom and threw up. My mother was devastated. She thought I didn't like her cooking, but it wasn't that. My body had forgotten how to handle real food." My body had forgotten how to handle real food. That's a tragedy people don't talk about. The physical inability to enjoy the very thing you dreamed about. The betrayal of your own body. And it wasn't just physical. It was psychological. Many veterans developed what we now call PTSD around food. They couldn't waste a single bite. They panicked if food wasn't available exactly on schedule. They hoarded food in their homes. They got angry if family members didn't finish their plates. One veteran's daughter later recalled, "My father kept cans of food hidden all over the house, in closets, under the bed, in the garage. He had hundreds of them. My mother would throw them out when they expired, and he'd get furious. He'd say, 'You don't know what it's like to starve. You don't know what it's like to need food and have nothing.' And he was right. We didn't know. But watching him live in constant fear of hunger broke our hearts. Watching him live in constant fear of hunger broke our hearts. This is the hidden cost of war, the trauma that doesn't heal, the fear that never goes away. These men came home physically, but part of them was still in that foxhole, eating cold beans, wondering if they'd survive the night. Some veterans went the opposite direction. They couldn't eat at all. Food reminded them of too much pain. They'd look at a meal and remember the friends who died, the men who starved, the suffering they couldn't forget. One veteran said, "Every time I sit down to eat, I see their faces, the guys who didn't make it, and I feel guilty. Why do I get to eat this meal when they're dead? Why do I get to go home when they're buried in France? So I don't eat, or I eat just enough to survive, because enjoying food feels like betraying them. Enjoying food feels like betraying them." That's survivor's guilt, and it's devastating. It meant that even in peace, even in safety, these men couldn't find joy. They couldn't enjoy the very thing they'd fought so hard to return to. The government tried to help. The VA offered counseling. Support groups were formed. But mental health treatment in the 1940s and 50s wasn't what it is today. PTSD wasn't even recognized as a diagnosis. Shell shock, combat fatigue, these terms existed, but they didn't capture the full experience. And food-related trauma, nobody talked about that at all. So these men suffered in silence. They carried their burdens alone. They pretended to be fine. They pushed through. They raised families and worked jobs and acted normal. But inside, they were still hungry, still scared, still traumatized. And many of them never healed. They lived their entire lives with that wound, that fear, that pain. Here's something that really got to me. Many World War II veterans, even in old age, couldn't stand to see food wasted. Their grandchildren would leave food on their plates, and these elderly men would get upset. Not angry exactly, just hurt, confused, unable to understand how anyone could take food for granted. One veteran in his 90s said, "My great-grandson threw away half a sandwich, just threw it in the trash, and I couldn't speak. I just stood there staring at that garbage can, thinking about all the times I would have killed for half a sandwich, thinking about my friends who died hungry. And this kid, this lucky, blessed kid, throws it away like it's nothing. I know he doesn't understand. How could he? But it breaks my heart every single time. It breaks my heart every single time." That's the legacy. That's what war does. It creates wounds that never fully heal. It changes you so fundamentally that even 70 years later, the sight of wasted food can bring you to tears. And we need to understand this. We need to honor it, because these men gave us the freedom to take food for granted. They suffered so we don't have to. The least we can do is remember. Now, I want to talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. The women who served. Specifically, the women who worked in military food service, because while men were fighting, women were feeding. The Army had WWII, Women's Army Corps. The Navy had WWIIs, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. The Marines had Women Marines. And many of these women worked in mess halls, field kitchens, and supply depots. They prepared food. They served it. They worked 18-hour shifts trying to keep soldiers fed. And their stories aren't incredible. One WWII wrote, "People think we had it easy because we weren't in combat, but try cooking for 2,000 men in a tent in 100-degree heat. Try serving hot meals while bombs are falling close enough to rattle your teeth. Try smiling and being cheerful when you're exhausted and scared and worried about your brother who's fighting somewhere else." We served because we believed in it, because feeding those men was our way of fighting. Feeding those men was our way of fighting. That's powerful, because food service is often dismissed as non-combat work, as secondary, as less important. But these women understood the truth. You can't fight on an empty stomach. You can't win a war if your soldiers are too weak to move. Feeding the troops was absolutely critical, and these women did it with pride. They worked in dangerous conditions, near front lines, in bombed-out cities, on hospital ships treating wounded men. They prepared meals with inadequate supplies. They stretched rations to feed more people. They got creative when ingredients ran out. They made soldiers feel cared for when everything else felt hopeless. One soldier wrote about a WWII who served him breakfast. "I hadn't seen a woman in 8 months. I'd been eating cold sea rations for weeks." And this lady handed me a tray with hot eggs and coffee, and she smiled at me. She said, "Eat up, soldier. You deserve it." And I almost cried, not because of the food, though that was great, but because she saw me. She acknowledged that I was human, that I mattered, that kindness still existed. That kindness existed. Women in food service reminded soldiers of home, of normalcy, of the world they were fighting to protect. But it wasn't easy for these women. They faced discrimination, they were paid less than men, they weren't given the same recognition or medals. And after the war, their contributions were largely forgotten. History books focus on combat, on battles, on famous generals, but they don't talk about the women who worked around the clock to keep those soldiers fed, who sacrificed their own comfort and safety, who served with just as much dedication as any soldier. Let me tell you about the nurses who also dealt with food. In field hospitals, nurses had to feed wounded men who couldn't feed themselves, men whose jaws were wired shut, men who had lost the ability to swallow, men who were dying and just wanted one last taste of something good. One nurse wrote, "I had a soldier who was dying. He knew it, we knew it, and he asked me if I could get him a Coca-Cola. Just a sip of Coke. That's all he wanted before he died. I searched everywhere. I begged. I traded my own rations."
So what can we learn from all of this? Why does this history matter today? Let me tell you why I think this is so important. First, it teaches us about resilience. These soldiers survived on terrible food in terrible conditions and still found ways to keep going. They didn't give up. They didn't quit. They adapted. They made do. They found joy in small things. A hot meal became a celebration. A care package from home became a treasure. They learned to appreciate what they had instead of mourning what they'd lost. That's a lesson we all need. In our world of abundance, we've forgotten what scarcity feels like. We waste food without thinking. We complain if our meal isn't perfect. We take for granted that food will always be available. But these soldiers knew better. They knew that food is precious, that every meal is a gift, that nothing should be wasted. Second, it teaches us about gratitude. When you hear these stories, you can't help but feel grateful for what you have. The fact that you can open your refrigerator and find food, the fact that you can choose what to eat, the fact that you don't have to eat cold beans from a can while bullets fly overhead. That's not something to take lightly. That's freedom. That's privilege. That's something people died to protect. Third, it teaches us about community. These soldiers shared their food. They took care of each other. They made sure nobody went completely without. That sense of solidarity, that willingness to sacrifice for the group is something we've lost. Today, we're more individualistic. We focus on ourselves. We don't think about how our actions affect others. But these soldiers understood that they were stronger together, that sharing made everyone better, that community was survival. Fourth, it teaches us about the true cost of war. We talk about casualties. We count the dead. But we don't talk enough about the living, about the men who came home broken, about the trauma that lasted decades, about the families who struggled to understand. Food scarcity was part of that cost. Malnutrition was part of that cost. And we need to remember it when we make decisions about war, when we send young people to fight. We need to count all the costs, not just the obvious ones. Fifth, it teaches us about human dignity. Every person deserves to eat. Every person deserves nourishment. Food isn't just fuel, it's culture, love, connection, and humanity. When we deny people adequate food, we deny them dignity. We strip away part of what makes them human. These soldiers fought to protect human dignity, and we honor them by ensuring everyone has enough to eat. Not just survival rations, but real food, good food, food that nourishes body and soul. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you really appreciated a meal? Not just ate it, but truly appreciated it. The flavors, the textures, the fact that you had it. When was the last time you said thank you for your food? Not just a quick prayer or habit, but a genuine moment of gratitude. These stories should change how we eat, how we think about food, how we treat the abundance we have. I'm not saying you should feel guilty. That's not the point. The point is awareness. The point is connection. The point is honoring the sacrifice by not taking it for granted. As I've researched this topic, I've been changed by it. I can't look at food the same way. I can't waste anything without thinking about those soldiers. I can't complain about a meal without hearing their voices in my head. The men who dreamed about their mother's cooking. The men who ate insects to survive. The men who cried over a can of peaches. The men who came home and couldn't enjoy food ever again. Their stories haunt me in the best possible way because they remind me what's important, not just about food, but about life. They remind me that comfort is a privilege, that safety is a gift, that every ordinary day is extraordinary when you've lived through hell. These soldiers didn't fight for glory. They didn't fight for medals or parades or history books. They fought so they could go home, so they could sit at a table with people they loved, so they could eat a simple meal in peace. That's what war was really about for them. Not ideology, not politics, just the basic human desire to live a normal life. And food was the symbol of that normalcy. It represented everything they'd lost and everything they hoped to regain. I think about the soldier who said enjoying food felt like betraying his dead friends. I think about the mother who cooked for her absent son. I think about the nurse who found a Coca-Cola for a dying man. I think about the 90-year-old veteran who still can't stand to see food wasted. These aren't just history lessons, these are human stories. Stories of suffering and resilience. Stories of loss and hope. Stories that connect us across time. Because we all eat. We all need food. We all understand hunger on some level. And when we hear about hunger taken to the extreme, it touches something deep inside us. It makes us grateful. It makes us aware. It makes us human. So here's what I want you to take away from this video. The next time you sit down to eat, think about them, the soldiers who couldn't, the soldiers who ate terrible food to stay alive, the soldiers who dreamed about real meals, the soldiers who never made it home. Don't let it ruin your meal, let it enhance it. Let it make you grateful. Let it remind you that the freedom to eat in peace is something people died to protect. And if you can, do something in their honor. Don't waste food. Share with others. Thank the people who cook for you. Appreciate the simple pleasure of a good meal. These might seem like small actions, but they're how we honor the sacrifice. They're how we remember. They're how we ensure that their suffering wasn't meaningless. I also want to say something to any veterans watching this video or family members of veterans. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for enduring things I can't imagine. And if you're struggling with food-related trauma, know that it's real. It's valid. It matters. You're not weak for being affected by it. You're human, and there's help available if you need it. You don't have to carry that burden alone. So that's the story. That's what American soldiers really ate in World War II. C rations that tasted like metal, K rations that left them hungry, 10-in-1s when they were lucky, spoiled food in the Pacific, captured enemy supplies, care packages from home, holiday turkeys when possible, and cold, terrible, life-sustaining food when nothing else was available. But more than that, it's a story about humanity, about young men trying to survive, about families trying to stay connected, about women serving with dedication, about the hidden costs of war, about what it means to be truly hungry, and about what it means to finally have enough. I hope this video has opened your eyes. I hope it's made you think. I hope it's made you grateful. And I hope you'll share it, because these stories need to be told. These soldiers need to be remembered, not just for their battles, but for their daily struggles, not just for their heroism, but for their humanity. If you found this valuable, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history, and leave a comment telling me what affected you most. What story stuck with you? What will you remember? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you have a family member who served in World War II, share their story in the comments. Tell us what they ate, what they remembered, what you told them. Let's create a community of memory, a place where these stories live on. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for taking the time to learn about what these soldiers endured. They deserve our attention. They deserve our respect. They deserve to be remembered, not just as soldiers, but as hungry, scared, hopeful young men who ate terrible food and kept fighting anyway, who dreamed of home, who survived impossible conditions, and who came back changed forever. Remember them, honor them, and never take a meal for granted again. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, eat well and appreciate every bite.